Let's start our review of decimals and percentages. Decimals are similar to fractions in that a decimal is used to represent part of a whole number. We'll see that this is actually very closely related to fractions because a decimal is simply a fraction with a denominator that is some power of 10. So 10, 100, 1,000, etc. For example, 2 over 10 is the equivalent of 0.2. And so there we see the relationship between a fraction and a decimal. Another example, if I take a fraction of 73 1/100ths, that's the same as 0.73. Or to look at one more, let's say that I have 5 1,000ths. 5 over 1,000 is equal to 0.005. So decimals are simply another way, and a convenient way, to represent numbers that are less than 1. To expand on those examples, here's a table that shows the equivalent of different decimals and fractions. So for example, let's say that I have a decimal of 0.297. Well, we have a 2 in the tenths place, so that would correspond to the tenths place. The 9 is in the hundredths place, and the 7 is in the thousandths place. Okay? And so, again, we can see what the equivalent is in this table between any decimal and the equivalent fraction. We could use that table if we wanted to change a fraction to a decimal. So again, if I have a fraction such as 9 over 100, since I know that 1 over 100 is the same as 0.01, then I can see that 9 1/100ths would simply be 0.09. Similarly, if I want to go the other way, if I have a decimal, I can change it to a fraction. So for example, if I want to change the decimal 0.07 back to a fraction, since I know 0.01 is equal to 1 over 100, then 0.07 would simply be equal to 7 over 100. Or to look at another example, 0.236, if I want to figure out what's the equivalent fraction there, well, I know that 0.001 is equal to 1 over 1,000, and so therefore 0.006 would be 6 over 1,000, or 236 over 1,000 would be what 0.236 is equal to. Let's look at what we need to do if we want to add or subtract decimals. So when we've got numbers that are decimals, the first thing we do is write down the numbers so that the decimal points line up vertically. Then we simply add or subtract the numbers as we would with whole numbers. And we make sure to keep the decimal in the same place in the answer that it was in the numbers that we were adding. Let's say that I want to add up these 3 numbers that all have decimals. So the first thing I want to do is write the numbers so that the decimal points line up vertically. So I have 3.6, and I want to add to that 45.201. So I'll write 45.201. And you'll notice that I made sure to line up the decimal points. The next thing I'm going to do is write down the next number, which is 3.86. And when I have that written down, again, I've made sure to line up the decimals. It's certainly fine and probably a good idea to fill in zeros so that all of the numbers have the same number of digits to the right of the decimal place. Once I've got them lined up correctly, now I just add them just like I would if there weren't decimal points there. So I get 1 here, 0 plus 0 plus 6 is 6, 8 plus 2 plus 6 is 16, so I get a 6, I carry a 1. 5 plus 6 is 11, carry 1, so I get 12, and 52. And then finally, I make sure to put the decimal point in the same place as it was in the numbers that I'm adding. And so the answer would be 52.661. So let's do a subtraction example. Again, I'm going to write the number so that the decimal point is in the same position. So I have 58.28, and I want to subtract from that 22.989. And I'm going to put a 0 here just to keep track of that place. And now I'm going to go ahead and do that subtraction. So let's see, I have to borrow here, so I'll change that to 7 and put a 1 there. So I'm subtracting 9 from 10, which gives me 1. Got to borrow again. So 8 from 17 gives me 9. And now I've got to borrow again, so 4, that becomes 11. 9 from 11 is 2. And then 2 from 4 is 2, and 2 from 5 is 3. And so the answer would be 32.291. So let's take a look at how to multiply decimals. The first thing we do is we multiply the two numbers just as if they're whole numbers. Then what we have to do is figure out where the decimal point goes in the result. And what we do is we place the decimal point in the result so that the number of decimal places in the result is equal to the sum of the number of decimal places in the original numbers. So here we are multiplying two numbers. We're multiplying 21.25 and 1.3. So you'll notice that I don't have to, or that I don't line up the decimals like I do when I'm adding or subtracting. Here I just write down the two numbers, and I'm just going to multiply them, kind of ignoring the fact that the decimals are there. So 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times 2 is 6, so that becomes 7. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. And then I'm multiplying by the 1. So 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. And 1 times 2 is 2. And now I'm going to add those up. So let's see, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That becomes 6, 7, 2. So I've now got my numerical answer, but now what I have to figure out is where does the decimal point go? Well, if I look at this number, I can see that that number has 2 decimal places. And this number has 1 decimal place. So that means that the answer should have 3 decimal places. And so down here in the answer I have 1, 2, 3 decimal points. And so the answer is 27.625. Let's take a look at how to divide decimals. So the first thing we do is if the number that we're dividing by, which we call the divisor, if that has a decimal point in it, we move it to the end of the divisor, and we move the decimal point in the number we're dividing into, which is called the dividend, the same number of places to the right. Then we place the decimal in the answer directly above the 1 in the dividend. Once we've done that, we just go ahead and divide as we would with whole numbers. So here's our example. We want to divide 0.003 into 33.6. Okay? So the first step says move the decimal to the end of the divisor. So that's 0.003. So I move that 1, 2, 3 places to the right. So now I do the same thing with the number I'm dividing into, the dividend. So I move it 1, 2, 3 places to the right. And I'm going to add in zeros there. So now the decimal point is there. And I now make sure to put the decimal point there for the answer. Now I just go ahead and divide. So 3 goes into 3 once. 3 goes into 3 once again. 3 goes into 6 twice. And then we get 0, 0. And so the answer is 11,200. We now want to look at percentages. The term percent simply means per 100. And in order to keep track of when we're dealing with percents, we use this symbol, the percent symbol, to denote percents. So let's take a look at an example of what it is I'm talking about here. Let's say that we have 27%. What 27% means is simply 27 per 100. In other words, 27 over 100. And as we know, we can write that not only as a fraction, but we could write it as a decimal as 0.27. So kind of the easy thing to remember is when you have a percentage, when you want to convert it to a decimal, you'll notice that you're simply moving the decimal point 2 places to the left. Let's take a look at an example. What is 27% of 396? Well, in order to do a calculation like this, the first thing that we do is we convert that percentage to a decimal. So we go from 27% to 0.27, and then we simply take 0.27 and multiply 396 by it. And if you do that on your calculator, what you'll find is that it comes out to 106.92. So that would be 27% of 396. The next thing we want to look at is percent increase. So if we want to increase a number by a certain percentage, we take the percentage of the number and then add it to the original figure. So for example, increase 350 by 20%. We first take 20% of 350, and again, the way I do that is convert it to a decimal, multiply 0.20 times 350, and if you work that out, you'll find that it's equal to 70. So now to find out the answer, I take the original figure, 350, and add on 70. And so if I increase 350 by 20%, what I end up with is 420. Now, there's another way that you can do this, because you'll notice that what we really did here was we took the original number and then we added 20% of it. So you can get the same answer by thinking of what we want to do is take 120% of the original number. So we want the original number, which is the 100%, plus the 20 additional percent. So in other words, that's the equivalent of just taking the original number and multiplying it by 1.2. And if you do that, once again, you'll see you get 420. So you can really do those either way. Finally, let's look at percent decrease. Percent decrease, same idea as percent increase. So here, to decrease a number by a percentage, calculate the percent decrease and then subtract it from the original number. So in this example, it says decrease 780 by 25%. So the first thing we would do is take 25% of 780, or 0.25 times 780. And if you work that out, you get 195. And then take that original value, 780, and subtract the amount you're decreasing it by. So 780 minus 195 gives you an answer of 585. And so that's what decreasing 780 by 25% would give you. Now, just like in percent increase, there's another way we could look at it. If we're decreasing the number by 25%, that's the same thing as taking 75% of the original number. In other words, we start out with 100%, and if we subtract 25%, that gives us 75%. So we can get to the same answer by instead just directly taking 75% of the original number. And once again, if we take 780 and multiply by 0.75, we get 585. So again, you can do those either way.